This is a 3-year project that we've been running, and it's funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, and I'm based at the University of Wales Trinity St David. Surya is based in Coventry, and we have partners in Edinburgh as well, so we've got a strong local connection with this particular project. Normally we meet virtually, so it's unusual for us to be face to face like this.
Yeah, a little scary.
Yeah, it's very scary. I'm totally scared. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's nice to real time meeting. Yeah. So our project has been running nearly 3 years now, and it's looking at different aspects of what we call cyber Islamic environments. I'll be looking at that definition in a moment's time. One of the key questions is asking what the impact is of cyber Islamic environments on UK Muslim communities, diverse communities, different kinds of impacts on life, society, practice and belief. And we have 3 principal strands within the project: religious authority, gender and political agency, but inevitably there's a lot of spillover into other zones as well. So whilst those are sort of discrete areas, we find ourselves writing about all 3 at once sometimes, as you'll see later on in this presentation. Cyber Islamic environments, that's actually a term that I came up with in the early 2000s. Islam and the internet is my principal research area, has been for a frightening amount of time. I started when all of the computers were beige, if you remember that, and on the pre-browser era. Try explaining that to people, what life was like before this always-on mobile internet connectivity. I was working on it back in the day. In terms of cyber Islamic environments, it's a kind of holistic term, and it's evolved over the years as well, in line with technological developments and shifts in usage. And that's something that I've tried to chart and we've brought into this project now. So it can cover things like religious sources, networking, diversity of religious expression, politics, activism, and ideas about leadership, interpretation and authority. We also have to be a little bit techie about it as well, because obviously since the early 2000s the technology has shifted. So what's the impact been of things like the increase in mobile phone usage, the reduced digital divide, ideas about networking have changed. We've got artificial intelligence, which we're working on now as well. The introduction of social media. All of those have had an impact on the way in which Islam is mediated and how ideas about religious expression are presented. So the technology works hand in hand with the ideas about religion as well. And the idea is that we are examining and mapping everyday lived experiences.
Yes, which is my cue to start talking. I knew the beige computers as well that Gary is talking about, but I was about 9 years old.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Please. I think, I'm a sociologist of religion. I was telling Tom, we met when I was a PhD student about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, something like that. And throughout my academic career, the internet has been, at the front of sociological imagination when it comes to people's lived experiences. Now, as a sociologist, I am less interested in the structures of faith, the rules, the regulations, the scriptures, the institutions, and I'm more interested in how people actually navigate these different structures. So, how do they fall in love? How do they go to work? How do they decide what they're going to wear? And where do they get their mortgage from? Questions like that are increasingly now happening online, and this is really my interest in this project. So me, Gary, Frederick, who is not here with us today, he's somewhere. But we've also got colleagues, Dr. Sadiq Hamid, Dr. Khadija Al-Shayal, Dr. Alamgir Ahmed, and Dr. Laura Jones. So we're sort of spread out. Me and Gary are here with you today. We're really interested in mapping this everyday lived experience of digital Islam in Britain. Quickly about methods, I could go on about methods. I'm a bit, I'm passionate about methods, but I don't want to bore you to death. So very quickly, and this breaks my heart, but very quickly I shall whiz through methods. We did some archiving. Gary will talk to you about it in a bit. We ran focus group discussions, interviews, surveys, diary solicitation. I'll talk about all of these in a minute. So we ran 10 focus group discussions, different cities and online. This was to ensure that all the work we did was really grounded in what people were interested in. So we ran 5 of these focus group discussions before we did any of our field work, and then 5 of them after, when we had our findings in and we told people, these are our findings, do they make sense? So those were the 10 focus group discussions. We ran interviews with 11 Muslim organizations, 9 quote-unquote scare quotations influencers, and we'll talk about that term a bit later as well. We ran a survey. Now, the reason why I'm talking about our findings is often research about Muslims, that is with and for them, can get sort of criticized. This isn't really robust. But our research is as robust as it gets. Our survey had 2,000 plus respondents. We implemented the survey via a survey company called Savanta that made it quick, our implementation. We looked at a gender split, we looked at age distribution. We also had, we oversampled for Muslims, so half of our sample was Muslims. The other half represented other religious and non-religious groups, and that has allowed us to make comparisons around Muslim experience. Now, I want to underline our survey was implemented in August 2023. Lots of things have happened since then. The Gaza situation, the man who shall not be named, who knows him? Who is the man who shall not be named? Andrew Tate. Lots of things have happened that have changed people's expressions of themselves online. And so at best, our survey is a snapshot in time. I mean, it would be a dream come true if I could do a survey like this, regularly, but we are all bound by time and resources. In terms of our survey structure, we had over 50 questions. It was quite a long survey, multiple choice questions, and generally divided into 4 areas: internet usage, religious experience, consumer experience, and relationships and communities. Now, we're not going to be able to talk about all of this today, but Gary and me are going to cover a lot of ground. And we also just 3 months ago implemented a shorter sort of add-on survey looking at Muslim responses to the situation in Gaza. What was this, how has this impacted their trust of online media sources and other places? But that's still research in process, so we won't be able to talk about it as much. We also collected 15 diaries from people over a period of a month. They reflected, and using a software called Indemo, they gave us live reflections of their digital experience. And what was really brilliant about these diaries, which we couldn't capture in other things, it became very evident how digital, we had women saying, I'm cooking dinner for my kids, or I'm doing the washing, and here you go, I'll give you a little entry about what I've done digitally today. So lots of personal insights as well. I think key to our work and key to our findings are that we reflect these everyday, nuanced, messy, but also intimate life stories. Quick thing about positionality, humor me, I'm an academic. Who we are in this team, our different identities, our different genders, our different academic disciplines have impacted, the diversity of insights that we have from this project. And I'm not going to talk a lot about this just now. And finally, a note about ethics. Now, our aim is to produce a rigorous and original research narrative, but we're also mediated. We're mediated by, do we build a fair narrative that challenges the scaremongering that we see? Do we build a narrative that is just? Is it adequate to just be neutral? We're going to be proper academics and be very, very neutral. or do we need to issue a corrective? Now, those are questions we still haven't answered yet, but I think it's worth putting it out there as food for thought. But over to you, Gary, a bit of archives and visualization stuff then.
Okay, so thank you. Archives. People might hold their hands up in horror with the idea of archives, and I can go on about the methodology, but I will save you this time. But archiving is one of the core things that we are doing within our project, and you can actually look at what we've done afterwards if you wish, if you've been inspired to do so, via our digital British Islam website, because we have a full set of our archives there. And what we have done is, over the 3-year period, we have used crawling technology, which is like on the internet, going out and finding sites based on a spreadsheet or set of spreadsheets that we had on different categories to do with digital Islam in the UK. Because what we wanted to do is capture the activities of websites. A lot of content disappears from the internet. You must have all gone through that experience of you find a site or you find a page and then you go and try to find it next week and it's gone or the content has changed. So what we wanted to do is have a snapshot from the 3-year period of lots of different areas of Islamic expression. And this is useful for us in terms of our analysis, but also if you can imagine somebody in several years' time wanting to find out what was going on in British Muslim communities, and they wanted to see what was happening online, a lot of it has disappeared. I mean, the amount that disappears, it could be a whole site disappears. In some cases, even in the duration of this project, some sites have disappeared. So we want to capture that for future scholarship, but also in terms of the metrics of our analysis as well. And I mean, it's an interesting place to go and look and compare we can get everything because there are thousands and thousands of sites, but we use the experience from across the team and their own academic experiences to build a representational list of content that we could look at and analyse and turn into data sets that other scholars can use and shove it through different software and so on. That's a very technical term, shoving it through software. We've been writing about our archives on the website as well, looking at different aspects of issues and how they are represented online. So we have articles where we try to explain the different aspects of the archive. The entire archive is also narrated. We're not just putting the websites up there, but we have academic commentary on all of the different sites as well. So people can go through, they can search it as well by looking at our, this is a typical page here. Every site has got a narrative attached to it, and also it's tagged. So you can compare mosques or you can compare different themes throughout our collection as well. So it's not just a case of getting all the links and putting them up and say, there you go. We've tried to present a narrative framework as well, using the strengths of our team members who have all contributed in a great way to provide these commentaries. And we've got different snapshots from different periods as well, so you can see specific reactions. We haven't captured social media. There's a very good reason for that. There are technical reasons, ethical reasons, but also quantity reasons as well, because there's just so much of X or whichever platform you happen to be looking at. But the websites are really useful because they are core to lots of different communities, organisations, platforms and individuals. That's the core of what they do online, and it takes quite a lot of effort for them to put the content through as well. So one of the things that we've been doing with all of this content is we've been shoving it into, there's that technical term again, different data visualization tools so that we can try to build patterns of different themes and ideas, and also try to build connections. Now I appreciate that this isn't an eye test and the print is very small. You have to take my word for it that this is tracking various mosques and looking at some of the connections between and within the mosques and how they relate or not to each other. And we've got lots of these different charts on the right that have built these connections up to see the different relationships and the different core beliefs that are represented online. So, I mean, that's something that is sort of work in progress, but already it's building up some very interesting connections of who's talking to who or not, and also what tools they're using in terms of their online discourse. And we're also using the archive content by crunching it, that's another technical term, into another software package. We can build word clouds to see some of the different collections and what some of the key themes are. So, for example, here I've got a word cloud taken from, how many mosques are there? There's about 8 mosques from Scotland that I looked at, and I built a word cloud based on that. So the bigger the letters, the more the representation is of a particular theme. So you can see the dominant themes that are there about mosques and donations comes up quite a lot. Events, services, and then the smaller ones are not mentioned so much. But that's quite interesting in terms of looking at the different agendas, because if I did another visualization somewhere else for maybe somewhere in Wales where I work, you might see a different kind of pattern. In fact, there is a different pattern. When I look at 10 mosques from South Wales, I get a very different set of priorities as well, different language things popping up. And then we're also using this sort of software in the same way to see what the dominant themes are from some of the different mosques. So here this is taking the text content and crunching it into another bit of software, and it comes up with patterns to see what themes are dominant on the website. So you can see like some mosques have got a greater emphasis on events, some have got more emphasis on donations, some on prayer. So you see the different emphases that appear, and you can make that more granulated. You're still with me? You can make that more granulated. For example, this is Edinburgh Mosque. So you can see here all the specific themes that are important to the Edinburgh Mosque and where their priorities are on a particular day. Maybe if I did another cloud from a year ago, you might see different priorities and emphases as well. And just by doing this, it gives a chance for us to reflect on what the mosques are putting out online, what kind of things are important or not, where the dominant themes are. And then you get different emphases again when looking at Edinburgh Mosque. You see where the priorities are in terms of donations and zakat. You got there discussions about Edinburgh. So you can see the different ways in which they appear. You could compare it if you wanted to do a comparison with Glasgow, which might be interesting to compare and contrast. That would be quite an interesting granulated project. So you can see there the different emphases of Glasgow Central Mosque and how they present the different themes that are happening there. We're going to put these on our website eventually, so you can take a look in more detail. And we're going to be doing detailed analysis of all of these word clouds and patterns as they are presented, because I think they tell specific stories about the websites, the communities, and the important themes that are dominating agendas, especially when you compare them across the time frame of the project. So, I mean, that's a snapshot of the archiving aspect, but I would encourage you to take a look at the archives and drop me a line if you've got any questions about it. The email's there, so we can also generate other word clouds for other places as well. We're doing that as a sort of ongoing process at the moment.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes. So, I mean, I am meant to talk about findings, but I can't help but comment on the archive. So, in another life, I'm a historian. Don't ask. I have multiple lives. And I presented the archives at this history conference, and everybody was talking about it was in Muslim history in Britain, and they were talking about things that happened in the 17th century and in the 13th century and whatnot, and there's me talking about digital archives. But what they said to me, the feedback was pretty amazing, because they said, we are producing history. So 100 years on, when some people want to see what were people doing, what was digital Islam like in 22 to 24, there'll be a repository. So this is a live, we are almost making history, not in the sort of grandstanding kind of way, but in the nuts and bolts kind of way, making resources available to future researchers. And I'd encourage you to, talk to Gary and find out more about all of this. But moving on then, we're here to talk to you about findings. What have we found, with all these archiving and data collection and stats? What have we actually discovered? And so we're going to talk about it across our 3 themes, just to remind you. And like Gary was saying, you'll see that all of our 3 themes sort of overlap and intermesh. Gender, we find, is across the board. We're not going to talk about gender per se in one part of this presentation, but we're going to talk about gender all through. Now, I want to start with what is a cyber Islamic environment. Now, Gary has been working on it for ages. He presented a definition to you. I want to present definitions based on our data. Now, this was Will Barlow, a sociologist whom we interviewed for the research, and he said, we asked him, we didn't ask him what is a cyber Islamic environment. We asked him, what do you think about digital Islam? And he said, basically, it's everything. You have religious stuff, lifestyle, fashion, makeup, interior, whatever, it's everything. And then he says, you go on TikTok, and he says, there's this random guy from Birmingham talking to this random guy in London, and they're saying random things. So you can literally talk about anything. And he says there are no rules for cyber Islamic environments. It's really, really messy. It's really, really complex. It's really mundane, which is what makes it so, exciting, because it's sort of everywhere. All of this, there is empowerment that comes because of the all-pervasive nature of cyber Islamic environments, because of the content. We've people listening to talks, to podcasts, as they're listening to the Quran as they are doing their 5-mile run in the morning, doing the cooking, whatever. The digital content offers possibilities and choice for those who experience in-person barriers, like me and Gary being a little scared of each other. Nobody got that, did you? There's stuff around time. They can connect to locations they otherwise couldn't connect with. So, there's a lot happening. Parents are using various cyber Islamic platforms to educate their children. This might be Islamic education, this might be their mainstream schooling, this might be anything. So it is all pervasive. It offers opportunities for empowerment, but there is a flip side to it as well that we shall come back to in a few moments. Now, as I was doing the work, there are lots of ambivalences when it comes to digital context. There is this idea of geographical distance and connectivity. Now, me and Gary, with Gary being in Wales, Frederick being in Edinburgh, and me being in Coventry, we were able to put together and implement quite a large research project without having met each other very often. I mean, we have met, we were kidding that we haven't met. And there is this distance. And when it comes to Muslim policy organizations, we have Zara Mohammed from the formerly of the MCB, and she talks about how previously it was really difficult. You had to run an event. It wasn't enough, you'd run something in London and nobody could get to it. But now you can just do it all online, and hey presto, everybody can attend. Is it a solution? Maybe. Do you lose something with not having the in-person contact? Probably, which is why we've come to Edinburgh. But there is this thing around connection and distance, and changing what distance means when it comes to cyber Islamic environments. There's another kind of distance and connection that is expressed online. Now, this is from Atia Azmi. You don't need to read the whole quote. I can summarize. She talks about feeling disconnected from other Muslim influencers whom she criticizes as being interested in particular topics in a very blinkered kind of manner. She says Muslim influencers interested in fast fashion, for example, they're not interested in sustainability. I'd rather go and join the online sewing club, because they're taking old clothes and recycling them, blah blah blah. So what is happening with the digital context is people are finding spaces where they can find like-minded groups. There's a connection there, but then are they distancing themselves from other groups? A last slide on distance. And this is about, I put the word there, liminal in there, or intangible. But here's somebody saying, as Muslim communities, and we know this is kind of true, we get very, very worked up about atrocities, about prejudiced behavior, about various kinds of Islamophobia and unfairness happening in other parts of the world. We protested recently because of the conflict, the genocide in Gaza. But what is also happening is all our focus on international issues and concerns means that we are sometimes distracted by what's happening on the other side of the road. Maybe there's domestic abuse in a family home, maybe there's hunger. We're not often seeing that. We're losing sight sometimes of local issues. I think I'll hand over to Gary now. How are people accessing Islam online?
Thank you very much. This is kind of interesting. Maybe it's predictable, but it's useful to reflect. I mean, I never thought that I'd be looking at something like TikTok for research when I started my academic career. And it's not my favourite place to go, I must say, but I sort of grit my teeth and take a look from time to time, because it is interesting in terms of the way it's being used by different parties, especially some Islamic parties or scholars, in quotes. So I do take a look at it and see what's trending and so on. In terms of our survey, we found that the most common platforms were YouTube, TikTok, Instagram and Facebook. But there were variations in terms of age and gender and religious affiliation and so on, with predictably the younger age group showing the highest level of engagement most of the time. It's kind of interesting to think about the language usage as well, where we found that, according to our survey data, 98.5% of the Muslim survey cohort were using English within all age groups, I think, more or less. 100% age 55 to 64. There were a few variants here and there, but also other languages popped up as well. 2.2% Punjabi, Urdu, more commonly used, 9.3%, Arabic 3.4%. So there is a little bit of linguistic variation, but it was interesting to see that sort of level of English being applied.
I mean, on this, it's really interesting. So there's, there are sort of sister findings emerging from some of the qualitative work, and what we've had a number of our interviewees tell us is this change in the flow of Islamic knowledge over the last few decades. So 30 years ago, most of the flow of knowledge would have been from sort of South Asia, maybe a little bit from the Middle East towards Britain. What we see now is the emergence of what our mate in Cardiff, Abdulaziz, would say Anglophone Islam, and you're seeing cross-fertilizations, not necessarily. This does not mean, that South Asia and the Middle East are no longer important, but a lot of these transnational flows are now across Europe, with sort of Britain being a little beacon of knowledge, but also across the English-speaking world. Australia, Britain, New Zealand, the Americas, Canada. I don't know what Trump will have to say about all of this. It's a new plot. But a lot of, so there's this Anglophone Islam that is really emerging online. And this does not diminish other sources of knowledge, but it is certainly changing how we consume Islamic knowledge. The British Board of Scholars and Imams recently launched the Global Board of Scholars and imams. Great initiative. Scholars across different countries are going to talk to each other. I asked them what were the countries included in this new global characterization, and they said Britain, Americas, Canada, Australia. So is that really global? But that's a sign of the times. That's how young people, but also scholars, are consuming and creating knowledge. Sorry, Gary.
No, thank you. That's great. So, in terms of the questions, we had lots of questions. We got lots of charts. We're not showing you all of them, but this was interesting. That we asked the question: do you feel you're constantly connected to the internet? And we had maybe predictable responses. There was a generational divide. Younger respondents. We couldn't do under 18s because of ethical reasons, but 18 to 24 and 25 to 34 were more likely to agree or strongly agree that the internet has a high impact. But those 65 or over strongly disagreed, and then there are all these points in between. And it was also interesting for the techies to see who was using what device, how many people were using tablets, desktop computers and so forth. I won't go through all the different colour schemes here, but we can talk about it later if you want to know who uses which device most. It was also interesting to see the type of media that was being applied, with the younger cohort now engaging more with AI sources like ChatGPT and all the delights of hallucinations and false information that might be popping out there. But people actually going onto these sources and using them to seek religious knowledge or interpretations or advice as a principal area, I think is a really interesting development. And they'll also go on social media, which of course is another trusted zone, to go and get advice as well. Whereas older people and the general population are more sceptical of this approach, but there is this very strong reliance. And I'm sure if we could have surveyed the 13 to 18-year-old, the numbers would have been even higher. And I think we've talked about AI quite a bit within this. It's really emerged a lot more in the latter phases of this particular project, and it's something that we want to extend in other projects maybe in the future, but it is having a profound impact already in the ways in which information about Islam is being mediated, and it's having an impact at kind of grassroots level as well, and we're getting that sense from our respondents too. And I'm not going to do a poll here. I'm just sort of wondering what the answer would be if we did a show of hands on this question. I often obsess about the internet and constantly think about being online when not on the internet. Well, I could probably put my hand up there, but it's an occupational hazard. I don't know how many of you would feel the same way, but this idea about internet addiction was also something that came through with our findings as well, with, of course, the younger zone, 18 to 34, more likely to agree, and the Muslim components within our survey also agreeing probably a little bit more than the other sector of our survey as well, and older people again being more sceptical about these things, which takes us nicely into the area of religious authority. I mean, that's one zone Saria brings her specific areas of interest in, and this is the one thing that I've been particularly interested in my books and other things as well in relation to online content. So we've got a little bit of focus on it here. In terms of the types of things that people are looking for in relation to Islam, and maybe we could have predicted this, but the Quran is highly important in terms of what people are searching out information for. So in the 18 to 21 category, 91% of people were looking for information about the Quran using their digital device and going online. Whatever the veracity of the sources that they were finding, which is another story altogether in terms of, especially in terms of translations and the type of online content about the Quran, that's the first place that people were going to look at. And that was quite a high number. Hadith as well, 70% people were looking at there. And then other topics, it starts to kind of scatter downwards, things like Hajj and marriage and relationships. We've got a little bit on that coming up with later on. So a high number of respondents were agreeing that they use search engines to find out information about religion, maybe rather than going and talking to local authorities and scholars and so on. We can discuss that in a little bit. There were some gender differences, but they weren't too pronounced within the findings that we had. And the other zones that people were interested in looking at, especially, were the fatwa websites. And we did a sort of little investigation of what people were looking at there. And we found that Islam QA came out top in terms of the most cited source within our investigations. But other sources like Fatwa Online, Ask Imam, and Islam Web were also commonly used. But also, in between all of those, which you might be familiar with some of them or all of them, has been kind of high ranking in terms of religious opinions. I have to use scare quotes over everything. It gets really irritating when people keep doing that. You just have to imagine them. But there's also the impact of so-called Sheikh Google. And I've actually pushed that forward to Imam AI as well, because people are using Google as a way of getting answers to their religious questions, and they're using ChatGPT as well to get answers as well. Not even going to the fatwa websites, but people preferring to go to Google to get their responses. So I think that's really interesting in terms of the dynamics of religious authority and the way in which knowledge about Islam is being mediated. And overall, 10.2% of our respondents indicated that they always visit fatwa websites for religious queries. Males were more likely to do that compared to females. A slight difference in the stats. Other people, once in a while, they'll go on. Online individuals, as would be expected, less reliant on these digital sources. But who are they going to look at? I mean, that's another issue. And will they prefer to go to the online authorities, or would they go to the local scholar or mosque or centre to get their information? Let's do a little kind of investigation here. We've done a top 10, actually I've got a top 11 here, but I don't like round numbers, of the people who came up most prominently within our investigations in terms of most popular scholars online. Who would like to make a guess as to any of the top 3 or top 5? Do we have any takers? Anybody like to make a guess? Who do you think might be the most popular? Based on our surveys, do you want to make a guess?
We won't judge you, don't worry.
We won't say anything. I was actually asked this question by a friend of mine, Dr. Rias Tamol, who's in Cardiff, who's done some research on similar areas in his work, and he asked this question. I think I gave the wrong answer. I think my choice was way down. I won't say who I said, but any ideas? Who might be top?
Okay, all right. Mufti Menk.
Oh, right. If we had prizes, we don't do prizes here. If we did prizes, yes, Mufti Menk.
Any more thoughts?
Any others? Any other takers?
Yes, Qadi.
Okay.
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 Let's see.
Ahmad Sulaiman.
Okay.
Okay, doing quite well here.
3 more.
We're going to do a big reveal any moment. Any other takers? Who have people been talking about in mosques, community centres, academically, in the street,
On TikTok.
on their smartphones, on TikTok? Any ideas? It might be one of these.
Hamza Yusuf from the States.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's interesting. We'll see where he was in our chart.
No. Is he even on our chart?
I don't know if he
No.
is. No. Any others? Okay, I'll spare you the pain and the anticipation. Here we go with our. There's our top 5.
Oh,
Oh.
I know too.
You've been looking at
We should have done scholar bingo. We could have had little cards, and we could have had you know.
golden hat.
Yes, that would be great.
Thanks to TikTok, by the way. That's why I know this.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
Too much time on TikTok.
Yeah.
There we go.
Addicted.
So yeah, Mufti Menk came up way above the others in terms of prominence within our results. Of course, with a different sample, you might get different people, but our sample is nice and balanced. And then second was Zakir Naik. Third, Tariq Jamil, and Aki Ayman, and then Omar Suleiman. That was our top 5. I'll show you the numbers, crunch the numbers in a minute in terms of our 5. But it was certainly Menk who was the most popular, and I'm not going to use those scare quotes, but most popular. And then others included what Syria said, he who should not be named, which seems appropriate in Edinburgh, J.K. Rowling. So, but he was there as well. And also we've got Abdul Samad, Bilal Phillips was quite interesting that he was there. Ali Dawa, I expected that. Yusuf Estes, yes. And number 11, I told you it wasn't a round number, so number 11 was Zainab bint Yunus came in, and that was our highest ranking female within our listing as well. So the Canadian Muslim founder of MuslimMatters.org, very active. She started online activities when she was in her teens, and she's been very prominent, very interesting sort of lifestyle commentaries and so on. So she was number 11. So that's what a lot of people were looking at in terms of their ideas about religious authority online. Those are the people that are dominating the conversations. So to know what's going on, I think it's important to track a lot of these individuals. In terms of our question, that was our chart. I won't read them all out to you there, but there are some that I would have expected to have been a little bit higher that weren't. But that was our top 10. I think we're going to talk about influencers now.
Yes. Okay. Let's go back to Gary's list. Maybe Gary's, this Hall of Fame, or what else could we call it? Mugshots.
She said it. I didn't say
Is it
that.
being recorded?
She said that.
Okay. Look at this one. We know there are people with some sort of scholarly training. He is essentially a singer, I think. Zakir Naik, brilliant guy, but also no traditional, no Islamic training. He self-taught. He's a medical doctor. Ali Dawa, I don't know, and Andrew Tate. He shouldn't even be on there. It's, I think one of the coolest things about this is Mufti Menk, who's got some scholarly training, but who's also quite good with all the posturing and the, riding speedboats through the, whichever sea he's been riding them through. So he's quite good at that. He's right at the top, but he's also got some sort of Islamic training, traditional scholarly training. And so my big question here is, are we looking at religious authority, or are we looking at influences? How is all of this changing? How is all of this evolving? When it comes to the notion of influencers, we had people who were influencers telling us, don't call me an influencer, it's a bad word. It's become so, overused, but also over-signified with all sorts of ideas. Is an influencer somebody who influences thoughts, ideas, and behaviors? Or is an influencer someone who's got the best videography skills and perhaps the best biceps or whatever it is, chest pack, six pack, and has skills with riding speedboat. So that's the big debate in all of our work around religious authority. Now this is one slide, one chart from our survey, and we asked our respondents to tell us, thinking about your understanding of Islam, to what extent would you say you draw on the following sources of information? And we've given them all sorts of information: books, local scholar of Imam, Islamic sacred texts here, through to international religious leaders, national religious leaders, through to family. And then over here you've got some of the the digital media sources. Go back, I forget this is a touch screen. There you go. Now what this presents us is quite a mixed picture. So when it comes to sources, it seems that Islamic sacred texts retain their position of significance when it comes to where people are getting their Islam from. So that's one finding. But if you look at these little bars over here, and I do radio podcasts, we have a bit we have a decent coverage. I think if we had to separate this, we would have had different results. But look at Muslim media, almost 25% say a great deal of their Islamic knowledge they garner from there. And if you look at the orange bars, there's a little bit of competition happening here. It's quite a messy picture. People are still going to their local scholars or imams, but they're also looking at national and international religious leaders. And I think we're at a point, it's almost like we're on a cusp where at some point this is going to change dramatically, and we're going to see a lot more leaning on this side of the chart. Anyway, and this messiness is, I think, what makes us looking at this work now so critical. With the emergence of AI, and we did not include AI as one of our options in our survey because this was quite early on into the project. Again, there's going to be different sorts of reliance that people are going to draw on. And certainly we've had young people say, we ask questions on ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever you want, and they're getting, I've looked at it, you get reasonably good answers when it comes to superficial stuff. But what happens when you go into the nuances and complexities of everyday life? That's when it gets difficult. There is again a generational gap. 71% of Muslims use YouTube for religious purposes, with young people leading this. There was one digital platform that older people in our sample, the sort of 65 plus, heavily relied on. Can anybody guess what that may be? Digital social media kind of platform?
Facebook.
No, not Facebook. No. WhatsApp, exactly. It's WhatsApp. And again, there's a lot of engagement, particularly post-COVID, attending. My grandparents who are in their 90s now, they are Catholic, and they become WhatsApp junkies now, and they're because they can attend Sunday Mass and everything from their front room, using a link that is sent to them on WhatsApp. They know to click the links, which is brilliant. So there's a decentralization of religious authority. Traditional hierarchies that were concentrated on local imams and scholars and community leaders are being challenged. Young people in particular and especially when it came to some of the trickier subjects, gender, sexuality, would prefer going online. Now, what we don't know is the quality of advice they're then getting. Online platforms allow individuals to access a broad range of perspectives. So there's a little bit of pick and mix going on, loyalties to, your particular mother, but also loyalties to community structures are dissipating now. And this is creating, individualization of faith, and younger Muslims are leading this shift. So our younger participants were more likely to follow a scholar online. But as I said earlier, traditional figures are not entirely being replaced. And one thing that is happening, and we see this perhaps with Mufti Menk, with Zakir Naik, with lots of people who populated that top 10 of ours, was that they are adapting to, using new technologies and adapting to different audiences. 18% of our respondents strongly agree that the internet has a profound impact on religious and non-religious practices. And this view is more prevalent among Muslims, 24%, than the national majority sample, of which only 13% said that the internet had a profound impact. Reshaping authority, so we've said that they're reshaping religious authority by transforming who gets to participate in religious discourse and how that participation influences socio-political hierarchies. And I've got a few quotes on that to show you. And again, young people are articulating that more than others. So, authority, ambivalence, and loss. Why do I put this there? This is a quote from Abdulazim Ahmed from the MCW, and he says, traditionally, if you said a scholar was legitimate, it was because they've got an ijaza, religious qualifications, and they've trained under somebody. Nowadays, and in digital contexts, that seems to be slightly overshadowed by how slick the production is, isn't it? He asks. And that is an enduring tension. Now, we could just say it's all about production, but there is debate within the scholars, influencers, social media, Islamic actors say that if you're not on social media, if you're not, standing on Speaker's Corner making those videos, then they accuse, if you're doing traditional scholarship, they accuse people of doing a disservice to the knowledge that they have. So there's a comment from Hamza Sortis, and he says, if you're just sitting in your mosque surrounded and only teaching people who sit at your feet, you're not respecting the knowledge as it should be. You should be out there. You should be producing these videos. But then Abdulazim says, you're losing something if you only... So it's a debate that the community has to have and needs to have now, led by our leaders. New leadership models, right? We've spoken about that, but lots of old debates. Women, oh my gosh, scary. We can do this. This is from a focus group discussion. She says, I think this culture of women being the authority figures changing the discussion of what women can do and cannot do. And she was female herself, and she says, getting this knowledge from women, it gives her a perspective that is more relatable. Fatima Barakatullah, who was one of the people we interviewed, she said she was really surprised that when she looked at her data and tracked her data of who was following her and tracked the demographic information, she was surprised that although she felt that her content was mostly targeted at women, 40% of her followers were men. So there's really this new debate happening around gender and gender hierarchies and gender authority online. That is, on the one hand, quite refreshing, but there is a flip side, again, that I shall talk to you about in a minute. So political agency, since we were talking about women, let's stick with women. You see lots of female networks taking place. Amalia is an example. There's transnational networking where they're exchanging notes across countries. Again, there is this Anglophone Islam kind of networking taking place around women's mosques, women's spaces. Some of you might be aware of the big hoo-ha that took place this Ramadan. Oxford, one of the mosques in Oxford, one of the big ones, they were having an iftar, and they said, because we don't have enough place, it's only for men. And then there was hoo-ha, it was all over the internet because somebody picked it up, put it online, and now everybody is interested. And the question is, was this mosque being exclusive of women? Possibly. But was it doing so for logistical reasons? Who knows? What the mosque did was, under that, where they said, there's no space, we don't have enough space, they also put a quote around the woman's home being the best place for her ibadah or her worship. So there's a bit, that debate is now raging, and I now have been invited to Oxford, the university, not Oxford, Cambridge, I think, is organizing a big conference discussing these issues and women's access to mosques. And what has been an issue, this debate is not new, women's access to the mosque. It's been raging for the last 2 or 3 decades here in Britain, but it's suddenly catalyzed now by an event going viral. Women activists are facing barriers. And the digital space also, it opens spaces for them and frameworks to articulate their voices, but at the same time you also have new challenges around scrutiny, around Islamophobia, so on and so forth. There are great shifts in political and social engagement. Again, you see younger Muslims are using online platforms a lot more than the older generation. And what is happening is traditional gatekeepers are being bypassed. Good thing, maybe, but not always. Activism is intersectional, so what you find is different aspects of people's identity. They might be female and they're joining, stuff around gender justice. When it comes to, for example, the recent protests for Gaza in London and elsewhere, this wasn't just about Muslims. So there's a lot of allyship coming together, lobbying taking place, again being led by young people. There are generational and gendered differences. As we've seen, young people are most engaged online. Gender influences, and I remember our colleague Dan he did a lot of our statistics for us. He said, I really don't want to see this. But we found, he really didn't want to say this, but we found men were more involved in political discussions and governance-related topics, whereas women were focusing on lifestyle, family, and religious studies. But we do not want to, buttress various gendered stereotypes, but this was something that happened. While online engagement is growing, its impact remains mixed. And this is the last sort of bit that Gary and you want to talk about. There is a lot of political agency, but there is also a lot of scrutiny. And some of this scrutiny can be underpinned by tropes that are Islamophobic and that are not very helpful at all. So Abdurrahman Green says, and he's quite, he preaches quite a bit online now. In a sense, he says, you give up all of that human connection, you create an online presence, but then they can shut you off, which they have done, he says to him. Basically, you put all your energy into creating a presence online and then they strangle you. That's quite strong words, but it's about the silencing of Muslim voices, of Muslim dissent. This came up in my Representing Islam on Campus research project a few years ago, where Muslim students were talking about being silenced by, Prevent, by other sort of monitoring policies. And key to this, 42% of Muslims do not feel free to talk about counter-terrorism compared to 28% in the national sample. So talking about scrutiny, 18% of Muslims felt safe to talk about sex and sexuality. 30% did not feel safe talking about religious leaders. This, we saw this during at the start of the Gaza war. If you said something in support of Gaza, great. If you did not say something, you were trolled. If you said something and it was the wrong thing, you were trolled. So there was a lot of contestation happening here, and people did not really know what to say. Some people switched off. 28% don't feel safe talking about the police, and we've already seen the stats about counterterrorism. Online safety is a big issue. So female participant says it is very, very difficult to be invisible as a Muslim online. And she talks about this triple criticism on three levels. She says there is cultural level, she shouldn't be online. Why is she online? Her scarf is a bit wonky. She doesn't have a scarf. Then you get the misogyny that's targeted against all women. And then you get internalized Islamophobia. So. And it isn't that the men are safe. So there's another man. The second quote is from a man, and he has a private account. He says he doesn't trust other Muslims and what they'll say or do or behave like online. So he doesn't want to harm his name. How do we protect people? How do we protect young people who are trying to get all their information online now, who are asking Sheikh Google and Mufti Copilot for their guidance? How do we protect them? And that, I think, is an ongoing question for policymakers like yourself, sir. Now, going back to ideas of activism, agency, and authority, there's also a hardening of attitudes and voices that are getting really, really shriller on both sides of this gender divide. and shrill on different contexts. I'm only using gender as an example now. So the first one is alt-right manosphere, and that new Netflix show that I refuse to see. Has everybody watched it?
Adolescence?
Yeah. I refuse to watch it. I've got young children. But there is this big thing around stereotyping, around performativity of, of male masculinity, a little bit of, the incel movement. We heard about incel. There's also the Muslim incels, and linked to also monetization. You've got people like Muhammad Hijab, who I think is a naughty boy, with his heart in the right place, but who does some really, really weird things when it comes to performing. Does a Muslim man have to be somebody who stands at wherever he stands and takes his top off and then screams about, he went to Leicester in the middle of the riots and spoke about Muslim power and taking control, and people in Leicester found that really unhelpful. So there is this really loud masculinity on the one hand, countered by this really loud femininity, and there's this, who's heard about trad wives? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and being more traditional than thou. You have the Muslim version of that as well. He says, jump, and I jump, I jump, I jump. And there are young women who are really articulate, who are really educated, who say, that kind of femininity, this sounds like, the guys say this sounds like heaven. So there are these two different voices, and actually multiple different voices, and each of them, because of the space that the online context gives them, is getting more shriller, and there's a lot of performativity that is making debates sometimes very difficult to have online. Policy implications, Gary.
We're going to have to be quick, I think.
Very quick. This one's yours, is it?
Yeah, I think so. We can just summarise really that wondering how we can investigate cyber Islamic environments and whether they can have an impact in terms of political agency, and whether there can be the creation of trusted online spaces for some sorts of positive exchanges as well, and what kind of engagement can be facilitated online by organisations at grassroots level, going through to platforms, going through to policymakers and places such as this. So we're interested in whether there's an online scoping that could be done in that way. Again, we can unpack these maybe in a few minutes, but also about responding to the ways in which responses to Islamic authority have changed significantly in the last, well, certainly in the last 2 decades, probably the last 3, because of the digital component. Ideas and relationships with Muslim leaders, organisations, and the individual are completely different to how they were 1 generation, 2 generations ago, where we've seen transitions to the usage of online content. So there's something there for policy makers to consider as well, in the way in which they work with Muslim leaders and organisations, and the forms of online discourse that take place. And you'll look at the last 2. Yeah.
I think I'm looking at the last two. So gender. Gary didn't want to talk about gender.
I don't mind. my wife's here, so I've got to be really careful.
So we've seen these as spaces of agency where women and men can assert their views and leadership, including on complicated topics like sexuality, like gender norms. Do I remove my hijab? Do I wear a hijab? All, it's really complex and messy what's happening online. I think the challenge is to see how we can enhance and harness this visibility for political and indeed economic impact. Our challenge to our brilliant host is, for policymakers, but also community leaders, to look at issues around safety, around digital literacy, to address some of the enduring inequalities. Now, think about our list of top, the top 10. There wasn't a single woman in the top 10. We expanded it to the top 20 and then found a woman. we probably need a lot more. I think there are women players and activists online. That's there. What we need is more recognition of women's scholarship, but also giving them the skills and the safety to say what they want to say. And that is, I think, something that policymakers and community leaders can take away. Scotland. So when it comes to Scotland, there is a need to empower Muslim community groups in Scotland to assert and to articulate their the very Scottish flavor of Islam in this country. When it comes to in this nation, there is hybrid programming, but in-person programming is really important to build networks and to build connections. That's why Gary and me and Tom and Zainab have made this event possible. So when it comes to policymakers, the challenge is how can you support Muslim organizations to do both things, to do online stuff, to do hybrid stuff, and then to enable synchronization of messaging, of events, of stories. And then I've got I think also Scottish Islam. That's a historian in me who had to sneak it in. Lady Evelyn Cobold, you all know her. Most of you might know her. She performed the first Hajj. She loves Scotland. She had a huge hunting estate up north beyond Inverness and Glenelg, and she's buried there. And there is, she is one example of a very sort of Scottish Islamic history, but also seafaring and the seafarers who came up north and made it their home. So there is, I think, in the work, in the digital sort of programming that happens, there is need to also talk about a very Scottish version of Islam. And that's that. Gary and me are very grateful to you for listening to us. We've been very, very attentive, even though at some points we've gone on and on and on and babbled. And thank you very much to our host, MSP, for inviting us into this beautiful space. Thank you.
Why don't we give them a big hand, guys? I think they've been fantastic. Double X has been very good. Professor Gary Bond and Suraya Shveli contractors. Did I pronounce it right? Yeah.
Professor Cherumal. Yes, sorry,
Yes, I've done it. Yes.
I don't pronounce my own name right.
No problem, Suraya. I'll just call you Suraya.
Yeah.
One of my auntie was called Suraya, so Suraya is
Saria.
Saria.
Yeah.
Right. It's always safe to ask. Well done. I think before I go into the question and answer, obviously I wanted to have more time for people to engage, and whoever is going to be asking questions, I would like to know where you're from. And I do know, I've been speaking to quite a lot of people. I do know there's a lot of people came from very far away, somewhere near Glasgow, Glasgow University and other Edinburgh University people, and loads of other universities people are here. So it will be good to hear who is here and what's their comment about the presentation. But I would like, before I do that, I want to thank Zainab, who's been working very hard to make sure that that event do happen. So give Zainab from Holyrood a good hand. Well done, Zainab. Zainab, do you want to take me here? Do you want to come down and say why?
No, but just thank you all for coming.
That's good. So I'm going to open up now for some questions. Who wants to go first?